Hello there! Welcome to Skunk Q Productions. I'm Crown Graves Kokon. Let's get into the video. Today's video, we're not going to be doing alternative history as we normally do. Instead, in today's video, we're going to be looking over what I got wrong about Ukraine. So last year, for those of you who have been long-term viewers of the channel, you'll know that I did many different videos about the Ukraine conflict as it was developing. However, since then, and actually for quite a while, I've been wanting to do this video, and that's to do with an update to my views on the matter. And basically, yes, I've changed my views on that, and this video is going to be explaining what I kind of missed out in that video. Because the thing is, with history, it's the study of what has happened, but obviously there's multiple different competing narratives, and the historian, to the limited extent that I am, has to basically look at all the different narratives and kind of pick one to kind of run with. And obviously, in the course of doing that, sometimes you end up missing some of the narratives because it doesn't necessarily fit in with what you're trying to necessarily say. And then also as well, as a public figure, as limited as my platform is, I think it's incumbent upon people who, if you've changed your mind, to kind of make a video and explain why you've changed your mind and explain the kind of thought process behind that. That way, more people will be more willing and able in future to kind of recognize, actually, you know what, I got something wrong about this, and they will feel less shame about changing their opinions, right? Which will mean that people will be more open-minded. So it sounds very kind of lofty and kind of very idealistic and stuff, right? But that's the intention for this video. So if you like what you're hearing already, don't forget, obviously, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the bell button so you're notified, and also check out our many other videos which have covered many different topics. And also in particular, I recommend watching these videos here, because these ones here, ones that we've already done, and they are most relevant to the topic at hand today. And also as well, before we kind of dive into the history of it and some of the theories about it, I want to give a massive shout out, first of all, to Possible History. So the shout out that they gave me last week really boosted my videos, especially the one to do with what if the Bolsheviks lost the Russian Civil War. So they helped me to get many views with that, and also got many different subscribers. So I hope that these people who have jumped on the channel recently, hi, nice to meet you. I hope that you guys have been checking through some of our other videos as well, to just join the community, right? And then also, as part of the community, I also have to give a shout out to all the people who listened to what I was saying and left a comment in the comment section, because yes, I'm going to be giving people shout outs. This video here, I'm going to give a shout out at the beginning of the video. I'm going to name people, I'm going to read out the names. But in future, I may either do this at the end of the videos, or I may just have this on screen at the moment. But still, this is the shout out to those list of people who actually put a comment in the comment section. So, big shout out to Chieftain 10, to Ice G, Hugo Billen, Alex Butler, Mr. Dark Plays, Sirius Aurelian, So Sig, SGB Media, Dollar Store Nationalist, Joe Chapman, Dark Phoenix, Marco DeCinco, Dr. Knight, and last but not least, Paul Eagle. So big shout out to all of them, and big yourself up, and we're going to do the same in this video. So don't forget, obviously, leave a comment at the end of this. And without further ado, we're going to dive straight now into the actual video. So thank you for everyone who's been patient thus far. Now we're going to dive in to the actual thing. So in the last video, I was speaking about the Russian Civil War, and one of the components of that was looking at the different nationalities which tried to break away. And so in that video, as you could see, Ukraine actually did have a history of being an independent state, albeit for a very short amount of time. So from 1917 to 1921, you had the Ukrainian People's Republic. And actually, you could see inklings of this even back when you had the election of 1917. So Russia, or rather the former Russian Empire at that point, they held their only free, fair election in 1917, and the results of that were very telling. So what you can see on the map here is that every region that would become Ukraine, except for one, voted overwhelmingly for the Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionary Party. So the Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionary Party, they obviously wanted a whole slew of different policies, but among them was Ukrainian independence. So as you can see here, you have many people, in some cases over 70% of the people in these regions voting for this Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionary Party. And the only region of Ukraine which didn't vote for this was the Taurida Governorate, which is essentially what is today southern Ukraine and Crimea. So what's interesting is that Russia today controls what it's always known as a Novaya Russia, and actually Novaya Russia has a lot of overlap with this Taurida Governorate, and obviously it was populated by many ethnic Russians. And this is part of the reason why they didn't vote for the Ukrainian Socialist Revolutionary Party, but instead voted for the Social Revolutionary Party, which tended to be more distributed around the whole of Russia. So you can really kind of see all the way back then, almost 100 years ago, that the vast majority of Ukrainians wanted to be independent, but the people living in the south of Ukraine, they kind of wanted something a little bit different. Fast forward now to 1991, and this is where you're having the independence referendum within Ukraine. So this is obviously the collapse of the Soviet Union, and you can see from this election here that 92% of people nationwide voted for Ukrainian independence. And it had an 84% turnout. So in terms of the population as a whole, this represents 77% of the total electorate voting for independence. So it's not only a majority of those that turned out to vote, but it's an overwhelming majority of the entire electorate. However, the only region which is kind of the exception to the rule here is Crimea. So on paper, the majority of Crimeans voted for Ukrainian independence. However, the turnout was incredibly low. And this is partly because many people who are ethnic Russians boycotted that election. And so as a result of that, just 37% of the total electorate within Crimea voted for Ukrainian independence. And you can also see that in the Donbass region, in the far east of Ukraine, you can see that there's a lot of kind of skepticism there as well. And what you can see with this is that even in the Donetsk region, 64% of the electorate there voted for Ukrainian independence, and 68% of them voted for Ukrainian independence in the Luhansk region. So clearly, even though you can see that there's a bit of skepticism, still an overwhelming majority of people in these regions still voted for Ukrainian independence. So now fast forward from 1991 to 2019, and you can see this is the election which made Volodymyr Zelensky be the president of Ukraine. So Volodymyr Zelensky, in the second round, he won 73% of the vote. And what you can also see is that the pro-Russian candidate, who was Yuri Boyko, he only won in the east in the first map, So that's something to kind of note, which is that, yes, still, although obviously people in 2019 still had their preferences, still it's the case whereby if you actually look at the second round election, you can see that many different people living in Zaporizhia and many of these other places here, which Russia now occupies, they voted overwhelmingly for Zelensky. So you can see that actually the narrative of the south of the country being much more pro-Russian, it's a little bit trickier to kind of paint that narrative, when you actually look at some of the nuances and some of the things which I missed out last time. And actually something to note is that Yuri Boyko, he, just like many other pro-Russians who are living in Ukraine, now, since the invasion, he has now become very skeptical of Russia, and now he and his party have become very pro-EU. And you can see multiple instances of that throughout this last year, and you can see how basically people who, they speak Russian, they are still opposed to Russia's invasion, right? The famous thing where they have these babushkas, and they're speaking in Russian, and they're throwing sunflower seeds at the Russians and saying that we hope that sunflowers grow over your graves. So whereas the invading Russians were expecting the traditional thing of salt and bread, instead they are being offered sunflower seeds to basically saying we hope that you die. So if you wanted a perfect illustration of how this war, it really is the birth of a nation, in a way that I kind of overlooked in those early days, in a way which I underestimated in those early days, because I kind of looked at how things were in like 2010, 2014, I kind of used that as a snapshot and basically kind of was like, right, okay, these regions here, which are Russian speaking, they want to be part of Russia. No, that's not actually the case. So clearly the feelings are not mutual, right? It's not, they're not coming in as liberators, they're coming in as occupiers. And that's something which I underestimated last year when I was making all these different videos. And so that's what we're kind of going to explore now, which is what I got wrong and why I got these things wrong. So first of all, the why I got these things wrong. So that's as a result of two competing visions, right? So you have on the one hand, the realist vision, which is basically saying that there's spheres of influence. So you have an American sphere of influence, you have a Russian sphere of influence. It's all to do with great powers and basically the international chessboard, as I kind of covered in my video on geopolitics. Definitely check that one out in particular. But what that ignores is the liberal vision, which is one of self-determination, right? So these different values of mine end up clashing because yes, in a realistic sense, it's good to have an understanding of how different international players kind of operate on like a global scale, but at the same time, one also should have higher ideals and higher values than the very kind of amoral thing which is realism. So realism just says what is the situation, but liberalism says what ought to be the situation. So what ought to be the situation is that those people, wherever they are, ought to have the right to self-determine. They ought to say which country they wish to live under. And so I overestimated how strong the feelings were amongst the Russian speakers within southern Ukraine. And I thought that because that they speak Russian, that they would want to become part of Russia. When actually this is not the case at all. And actually the example which I'll use for my realist friends here who are still thinking like that is the case of England and Ireland. So obviously many people on this channel, they came to the channel because, they looked at like the history of Ireland, which I cover. But I'll use that analogy because the relationship between Russia and Ukraine is very similar to that of England and Ireland. So Ireland has an English-speaking majority. Ireland has a long history of being part of the United Kingdom, but Ireland and England are still very separate places. So even though you have some people on the island of Ireland who are very pro-British, that doesn't mean that as a result of that, in order to try and protect those people, that England has any right to invade Ireland. And even if, as I said in those videos, the Cold War went differently. Say, for instance, if the Warsaw Pact was the one who ended up winning and they were the ones who ended up expanding across Europe, if Ireland joined the Warsaw Pact, that would not give England the right to invade Ireland, even though it would be national security, etc., etc. The world would condemn England's invasion of that, and the Irish would be fully justified in resisting that invasion. At the same time, would I, as an Englishman, feel a certain type of way about seeing English soldiers getting killed in Ireland? Yes, I probably would. Yes, yes, I definitely would. So it's one of those kind of conflicting things where it's like, I see where the sides are coming from, and I understand why the English might want to be in Ireland, and understand also why the Irish would want to be independent. So in the same way, I understand why the Russians see Ukraine as being a part of them because of historical kind of ties. But at the same time, I also see things from the Ukrainian side and see, actually, you know what? They're tired of being bullied by a stronger neighbor, right? They want to be their own country. And actually, regardless of whether they speak Russian or not, it's completely irrelevant because just because I speak the same language as you does not give you the right to occupy my country. And I think that's what many Russian speakers in Ukraine are now feeling. They're feeling like, yes, we speak Russian, but that doesn't mean that I want Russian tanks rolling down the street. This is my country, this is Ukraine. So that's something which we've really seen. So I kind of underestimated this. This is kind of the birth of a nation, in a kind of real sense. Now, all the divisions which were in Ukraine beforehand have kind of been swept to the side. So, the East was more pro-Russian and the West was more pro-Europe. Now, it's the thing where the whole country is now unified, right? And actually, the places in Zaporizhia and all these other places within a Russian-occupied territory now, if these people voted overwhelmingly for Volodymyr Zelensky in 2019, I highly, highly doubt that these people suddenly now are pro being part of Russia. You see what I'm saying? So that's something to kind of bear in mind, that it's easy to have a kind of bird's eye view of the situation, but when you actually look at people on the ground and people actually feel on the ground, then your perspective on it completely changes. And actually, as much as you could say it's Novaya Russia and this and another, at the end of the day, these people in southern Ukraine, they have always seen themselves as being Ukrainian, and they always will see themselves as being Ukrainian. And it's only now the forceful invasion by a hostile, stronger neighbor, that's the only thing which now is kind of, in theory, made these places Russian. But I have to say this caveat, which is that moving forwards, how should the Ukraine war kind of come to its logical conclusion? Now, no matter what I say, people are going to say, you're an outsider, and blah, 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 blah. I understand what people are saying. At the same time, I think logically, speaking about a kind of cost-benefit analysis, I think that Ukraine, in theory, they kind of are talking about going back to 2014, so retaking the Donbass, retaking Crimea. They could do that, but it will be very, very costly, in terms of men and resources and etc. But even if they were to actually do that, the Russian ethnic minorities which live there would then see them as an occupying force, and then there'd be all sorts of headaches with regard to that. And also Russia would still, Russia is going to be a menace to Ukraine regardless, right? But there'd be an extra kind of legit reason for them being a menace in that kind of way. So I think realistically, going back to how things were in 2021 were not ideal. But I think if the Ukrainians managed to push them out of Zaporizhia, out of Kherson, and just leave them with the little bits of Donbass which they had before, and with Crimea, I think that that will be enough of a win for the Ukrainians to kind of get what they want out of the conflict without compromising too much things and incurring too many losses for too little gain. At the same time, I also think with regard to Russia, in terms of, we covered this in our video when we were looking at what if Putin was overthrown. And as I kind of said in that video, I think that Russia is not like Ukraine. It's not like many other places in Europe for many different historical, cultural reasons. Russia as a civilization thinks very different from many other places in Europe. And so maybe in 30, 50 years time, you could have this kind of liberal, democratic kind of Western Russia. But in today's Russia, that's just not possible. And, any kind of replacement of Putin is just going to be a more hardline, more nationalistic, more militaristic Russian leader, and also be a lot more authoritarian. So Putin, as bad as he is, he's probably the best of a bad bunch. So people kind of saying, oh, we should keep fighting the war so that Putin's overthrown. Realistically, that actually doesn't make any sense if your stated aim is any sort of sanity. So I think that Putin realistically, kind of, as much as I wouldn't want him to, probably should kind of stay where he is. So it's not great, but I think that if Ukraine just was like, right, we've pushed them out of these regions here, we now recognize Crimea and Donbass as being part of Russia, then their territorial integrity from there can be established. Because a big block to them joining NATO is the fact that their territory is, up in limbo. But if they kind of redrew their own borders and then said, right, this is us now, etc., then they would be able to join NATO. And then Russia would never again be able to encroach on their territory. And so that to me, I think is just the realistic thing. How long it takes for us to get to that realistic end goal, who knows, right? But I think that's kind of the most likely kind of scenario. But of course, I'm happy to be proven wrong. And so definitely let me know in the comment section what you think about this. Obviously, it's a very complicated topic and things are changing by the day. So by the time this video comes out, there could have been a whole different, changing of the situation. But still, let me know in the comment section what you think. And also don't forget to obviously hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the bell button so you stay notified, and also stay tuned for our next video, which is going to be on what if Belarus joined with Russia. So we're going to look at the 1990s, we're going to look at Lukashenko, and we're going to look at Boris Yeltsin, the kind of deal which they were almost about to get together, which would have created the so-called Union State. So we're going to explore some of the history with regard to that, and that's going to be in the next video. But in the meantime, have a great day, and bye.